and the direction that we're headed. So this House bill is no different than many others when it relates to, there's a lot of law enforcement related bills that affect our operations or make requirements of law enforcement. And I'm actively involved in several. I actually am on the legislative committee for the Arizona Sheriff's Association, so this is not uncommon practice. But due to the, I would just say the seriousness as far as the impact that this particular bill has relative to our relationship with the community and trust and respect and ensuring that we have objective, ethical, thorough, and transparent investigations when it relates to the use of deadly force by law enforcement, I am highly concerned that we don't just take an action that on the surface appears as though we've moved the meter, but by action and in fact we make a positive change relative to this challenge that has existed for as long as we can remember. So let me clearly state to you, I am not in opposition to having a process and a program where law enforcement agencies utilize other organizations to conduct investigations related to the use of deadly force by your agency. To the contrary, I actually think it is the most effective way that we can ensure there's objectivity. That step in and of itself, though, does not address the greater challenge that we face. And the most significant challenge that we face, first and foremost, is ensuring that our number one rule and guiding force is the preservation of life. And that when we have a significant event where deadly force is deployed and we potentially take a life of another, that investigation is done properly and that our community receives transparent and timely information so that they have confidence that they can trust in the authority they've empowered us with. So as I speak to this issue, I want to make it clear again, it is not that I am in opposition to the philosophy of what's being accomplished, but I have absolute concerns relative to this legislative bill because it falls far short of what is needed to truly make positive reform in this particular area of law enforcement. And I know for some, when you hear rumors or you know certain things leak out there, it seems as though it's an us versus them. This is not the situation. We should all be invested in this. Now, it would be inappropriate of me to speak on behalf of my colleagues, the other law enforcement leaders. But I can tell you unequivocally that the majority who have a relationship would probably be comfortable with me telling you that we are in agreement. Arizona law enforcement leaders would like to lead by example and make sustainable change on this issue that is lasting and impactful. So what I'd like to do first is just point out the bill itself and my concerns, and then I'll take you to my position on it and what I believe are potential solutions that have been conversations and in practice for some time. So House Bill 2765, G, if you could put that on the board for me, please. Law enforcement deadly force investigations. I believe it's somewhere to the tune of about 130 to 150 words in total to include the amendment. And it states in this that we will use an agency not our own to investigate any circumstances where deadly force is deployed and a life is lost, leading to loss of life. It does not in any way, shape, or form construct who that partner would be, how we align with those relationships, the continuity of services. There is no guidelines to address the disparity relative to capacity of an organization versus the partner they work with. Let me just put this in plain terms, and I won't use any particular agency, but if one agency is involved in a high volume of shootings over the course of the year, and their only partner agency is one that is used to investigating 3 to 5 a year, the demand on resources is considerable. Now, as far as the community is concerned, if I were to partner this agency with another and say, I'll investigate your shootings, you investigate ours, how have we moved the meter to give confidence to the community that the law enforcement community itself is not practicing the same issues of their concern? If you have a relationship where I investigate yours and you investigate mine, how can the community trust that their concerns that exist right now as us investigating our own has changed at all? The fiscal implications, the assurances that those who investigate the crimes are the most highly trained, qualified, and experienced investigators in this particular unique category of investigations. So as a law enforcement leader, we must have a comprehensive, complex, funded program where we share in this responsibility, and that by design, it is an organization that represents our own who hold this sole responsibility. Now, the greater issue is transparency. What's not addressed in this bill is how do we have a consistent practice of sharing information with you so that you can pass it on to the community relative to immediately at the scene, within the next 24 hours, 3 days later, 7 days later, how much information is released relative to a law enforcement related shooting? And how do two agencies practice those same guidelines? So when I took opposition to this House bill, it is not because I don't agree with the principle. It is because I am concerned that law enforcement was not at the table to be part of the conversation to ensure that those of us who are responsible for the operations and the outcomes can provide input to develop a comprehensive plan. Now, I know that those who wrote it say that there was a stakeholder meeting. To my knowledge, we were invited to one stakeholder meeting 6 months ago where we expressed our concerns. And we were told there would be at least 6 more meetings where we could help develop this legislation. And then just a few weeks ago, it was brought to my attention, and that's when I took my position and I was involved in the conversation with those who wrote the legislation and other stakeholders. I expressed my concerns at that time. And I offered to have a meeting with Mr. Bolding, who was the author, I believe, of this legislation, to say, let's work together and see if we can find a win-win and we could actually develop something that is sustainable and impactful. I never received a return call. Then I reached out to Speaker Bowers and expressed my same concerns, and have had several conversations and meeting with him and other stakeholders to discuss why I am concerned. I will tell you the concern extends beyond my office, but again, I always stand for myself and speak for myself in my office. But the the Fraternal Order of Police, the FOP, the Arizona Sheriff's Association, the Police Chiefs Association, and I'm probably leaving somebody out, but a few others, ACOP, all agree. We want Arizona to develop a comprehensive plan that incorporates potentially a task force to address these issues. We cannot leave anyone out of the mix. In this legislation, it talks about Pima County and Maricopa County. How can we ensure that members of a smaller community in another county unnamed will feel confidence in law enforcement if they are following different guidelines than we are? If we can't develop this so that it applies to the entire law enforcement community in Arizona, then we cannot instill confidence in our community that we are doing best by their concerns. So it is my opinion that this is an inadequate bill, falls considerably short of what our community deserves. It does not address the complications, the financial burdens, the responsibilities, or the working design that would be required for law enforcement to accomplish the greater good. And what is the greater good? That all these investigations are ethical, that they're detailed and objective, and that we are transparent and accountable, as I spoke to earlier. Now, there's complexities that we can talk about that when it comes to your viewers and others, they don't want to get in the weeds, but I have to. In order to accomplish this, we have to have MOUs and IGAs. We have to have a working relationship that is predicated on ensuring that the resources depleted from our office don't adversely affect the other responsibilities that our investigators have. We have to make sure that those who are the decision makers, now my office is unique because until the election rolls around, I'm my own boss. But for my colleagues that are police chiefs, they answer to city managers and mayors and council. I will tell you that I have had conversations with mayors and my colleague police chiefs prior to this legislation just being delivered with the plan to develop a working task force that has an oversight council that would incorporate community members to be liaisons, that would call on the prosecutor's office and the attorney general's office to ensure that their guidelines are met relative to release of information and timeliness, and that we pursue funding to deliver training, and that we set standards for the members who are active participants. The task force would have a rotating team, so no one agency would be depleted of resources. And the design hopefully be one that majority of law enforcement agencies believe in and can support. For the smaller agencies where maybe they don't have the resources or the expertise, they can utilize the task force as needed. But as I told you, I've spoken to other stakeholders and expressed my ideals on how we could accomplish this for the greater good and receive support. And we actually have a meeting scheduled for next week where the top 10 largest agencies in Maricopa County, the police chiefs themselves, or on some occasions their XOs, will be attending the meeting to help design this. I believe this, and this is my philosophy. I'm all for legislation that makes positive change that is sustainable. I'm not for legislation that has political motivation or is intended to give the appearance of influencing positive change, but has no realistic ability to be sustainable and achieve an outcome. More importantly, I think it's incumbent upon law enforcement to fix this problem, because if the community wants to have trust in us, we should be the ones that lead it. Because if legislation dictates it to us, it appears as though we don't embrace it and we haven't initiated these changes ourselves. And right now, I can tell you, it is a time like any other in my 30-year career where the law enforcement leaders are excited about the idea of building this. So I would like to see this done without legislation forcing us to, and then legislation coming back to the table to make determinations on how to set some appropriate parameters and provide funding so that this can be an effective program. What I don't want to see, and I know this is a long time coming, over 200 years this has been a problem, and it continues to be a problem. But if we write legislation that has no chance of making positive change just for the sake of saying that we delivered something, in 200 years from now, another sheriff will stand at the podium and nothing will have changed, and that's unacceptable. So I take the responsibility when I stand in front of you myself saying that I can't tell you what my colleagues will or won't do, what they'll feel comfortable with, other than to say that I'm initiating a conversation collectively as a group to talk about this idea that I've shared in small context with you. My hope is that my colleagues, who are as if not more experienced than me, will come up with even greater ideas to make this work, and that we will develop something that can be replicated across the state. I will commit to leading this, but I will not now or ever support legislation that does not provide a solution for the problem that we face. And I have made the commitment to stay true to it. There's no place for politics in policing. So I don't care who writes it, what side of the line they're on. If they're thoughtful and we can work with it, then I'll support it. And if not, I'll speak to why. So I'm happy to take your questions. I think I've talked enough about why I stand where I stand and what I believe is the opportunity. But I'm sure you have your own perspectives on what you'd like to hear about. So what can I answer for you? And please, I apologize, I know most of you, but please tell me your name and who you represent.
Sure, Dave Biskobing, ABC 15. So this version of this type of bill has been around for years. It's been introduced. You say that you want to be proactive and do it. So I guess the question is, why haven't you done it?
Why haven't I done it?
Yeah, why haven't you and other police leaders done it? Like, I mean, you've had a year since George Floyd. This has been 6 months since you had a meeting. This bill would give you a year to get it done. So why haven't you done it? How much more time do you need?
Well, I can't tell you the time frame. Why haven't I done it? Well, there's a lot of things that we have accomplished, and there's some things that we haven't. So, okay, you're interrupting me when I respond to you, so let me respond.
So answer what's taking so long? That's what the public wants to know. Third-party investigations is some wild idea. So why haven't you done it? And how long is it going to take you to get this together? Because your meeting next week is after the crossover week. So you killed the bill by doing that. So when are you going to get it done?
Same question you asked the first time as I started to answer it. I have addressed a lot of issues. I don't have any one singular issue. We have been having this conversation trying to move the meter as quickly as we can, but it doesn't happen overnight. I have to get buy-in from a lot of people to accomplish it. So why haven't I done it? I don't have a good answer for you. I know it needs to be done, and we will work on it, but I can tell you that this bill does nothing to get us there.
Well, it would give you a year to get it together. It gives you a year.
And what happens after the year?
You would have a plan. You would have to turn it over.
No. What happens with this legislation after 1 year?
It says you have to turn your deadly force investigations over to an outside agency. That's what it says.
Okay, and with that outside agency, how does that resolve the issue?
The issue is that it would not be your agency doing the investigation.
And therein doesn't lie the problem. The problem lies the accountability and transparency of the investigations, because you're making the assumption that all investigations are flawed in some capacity, and that's why we haven't addressed this problem. The truth of the matter is the majority of investigations are not flawed because of us investigating ourselves. There are questions relative to that is appropriate, if that is ethical. So we have to change that paradigm. But the most important part beyond that is ensuring that we communicate to the public what has occurred in the process. So you say, why haven't I done it? Again, I've been the sheriff for 4 years, and I would love to have done this in year one. I've tried to address many other issues, and I've committed to taking the lead on this particular issue. In a year from now, if this legislation passes, nothing changes other than we grab a partner agency. Now imagine this. Everyone grabs their partner to say, will you work with me? And they try to find someone who has similar capacity and maybe volume. There's gonna be somebody left out of the dance, so there's gonna be a substantial agency whose demand is so considerable that no one other partner agency can meet that expectation. All this does is obligates us to find a partner and say, you investigate mine, I'll investigate yours. But that does not solve the problem.
It doesn't say you have to have a partner. You could create a task force, you could create some other thing. They're leaving you the option to do it, but they're giving you a time frame. Do it in a year.
But what I'm saying is when the legislation comes to fruition, it changes nothing. So if tomorrow we decide, okay, that's how it stands on its own, there's no funding, there's no parameters, there's no design to transparency or accountability, and there is no true solution for the benefit of the community. It is merely you'll have someone else investigate your cases. So for some agencies, that may work effectively, but for others, they could either be left out or not meet the standard. So when the community questions these shootings, we haven't solved the problem. We've merely found someone else to investigate our cases. And that is my firm belief.
But we're still getting away from the issue here. You say you want the public to see you do it, so they have trust in you, but you guys haven't done it. I mean, how long do we have to wait to see that? You said you agree with the spirit of the bill. We hear that a lot. But then no one wants to actually make the spirit into a body of something legitimate. So this is an attempt to do it.
Yeah, you can repeat the question as many times as you'd like to. I told you, I have been the sheriff for 4 years.
So 4 years now.
4 years.
4. Dealing
with 2 federal court orders and other complexities in this organization to resolve them. I am taking this on to the best of my ability right now. If it doesn't meet your satisfaction, I understand that you're a community member, you're entitled to your opinion. But all I can do is tell you that I am working to address this and do to the best of my ability. And if you think this legislation is going to meet that criteria, that's why we have a democratic process. But I am telling you as a subject matter expert and someone who's been in this industry for 30 years, that legislation is not going to solve this problem for us or for our community. And I want to develop something that is more complex that will. And that's all I can offer you in this moment right now.
Have you or your partners presented a bill to your the Republican side of the office that's controlled it to do this in recent years?
Why would we deliver a bill to do so if our job is to deliver the services to meet the need? Legislators, if they feel that we haven't, they have the opportunity and the right to write legislation and to demand it of us. And I've met with the legislators and the majority agree that they want to see this resolved in a different capacity. I'm going to come back to you, but I'm going to go to your colleagues who would also like to ask a question.
The majority agreed, you say you wanted to see this done in a different capacity through this bill. This passed unanimously through committee.
Through committee of 7,
It was, yeah, it was a Democrat-Republican committee. I don't know how much you watch this, the politics down there, but that's very rare. They heard testimony, they heard for and against, and it passed unanimously. So for you to say to stand up there and say, the lawmakers want it done differently, doesn't comport with the facts of what's been happening down there.
The lawmakers that I spoke to have, otherwise I guess we wouldn't be having this debate right now whether it'll pass, because if it passes, then we'll...
There's a 9-person committee down there.
Yeah. And what's the democratic process? Does committee make the final say that something is passed into law?
But they're blocking a vote
I'm
from even
speaking with
getting
him
to
right
the
now.
floor.
Yeah, but I was just going to bring that up. They were blocking the vote from moving to the floor. My understanding is because you've been having personal conversations with the speaker.
I've had the same access to the speaker that those who wrote the legislation have had. And we have both articulated our concerns. What didn't take, as I stated earlier, I've had meetings with the speaker.
How about last night?
As have yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah.
Off-site?
You say offsite, not in my office or
Not
what?
at the Capitol, but
At his
Rock
invitation.
Industries?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that an issue of concern?
Well, it's just you're having these meetings, right? And you're personally getting involved, and you say you don't want to interfere with the democratic process, but that's exactly what's happening.
No, as a subject matter expert, I have a responsibility to share my concerns who's responsible for an office, because I'm responsible for the outcomes. The people who wrote this legislation aren't responsible for the outcomes. They're responsible to write legislation that they believe will apply in some way to help deliver a result. But the way that it is written will not meet those expectations. And when you say, I mean, because you're stating as if it's nefarious that I took some kind of meeting off-site. Those who wrote the legislation, I'm still speaking.
To the speaker after the fact, you could have gone to the meeting and expressed these in public on a recorded setting in the public record. You could have done that, or someone from your
Okay,
agency.
and
but you didn't.
I love the fact that you want to be argumentative about this, but let me talk through the process again and do your best to actually try to be objective yourself. I was a participant in the phone call with Representative Boulding and many other stakeholders, all who expressed their concerns, all who had asked to be part of the process to discuss what would be best for a solution. And we were told that this is the legislation that's going to stand, and they'd be happy to add some language. I followed up and made a call to Representative Boulding, said, would you like to sit down for coffee and have a conversation so that we can talk about the issues of concern and potentially develop a solution? And I did not receive a return call. And then I called and spoke with the speaker, because I have no secrets, I have nothing to hide, so I'm standing in front of you right now. And I expressed to him my concerns. He met with Reginald Boulding and one of his associates and had the conversation in private with them about why they felt so strongly about this legislation. And then he asked if we'd like to have a follow-up meeting to ensure that both sides were heard. And his meeting was very thoughtful, asking all kinds of questions of many law enforcement leaders, not just me. Now, when you say off-site as if it's nefarious, where he chooses to have a meeting because he feels that it's convenient, that it's spacious, that it's the appropriate conference room, why does that matter? Why do you make that statement as though you're trying to infer that we were trying to do something that was secret and deceptive? The bottom line is we had that conversation with him, and he was empowered as the leader to make the decision how he wanted to move forward. All I did was provided my thoughts on what would be best.
No, I say that because you met personally with him to have this conversation. So I'm just trying to establish how closely connected you are to stalling this bill from even getting a vote. And remember, issues could be addressed on the Senate side too. You're stopping the discussion entirely by that.
And your framing of that is so inappropriate and dishonest. I am not stopping anything. I was asked by the speaker to provide why I believe that the legislation had challenges and what would be the best way for us to resolve this to meet the needs of this community. If he wants my input on a law enforcement issue, I'm going to provide it to him. But your portrayal of me trying to interfere and stop the democratic process is, you know, how often do we speak to legislators to ensure that they are educated on bills that they're responsible to write or to vote on? That is a common practice. Doing it on tape in the House, yeah, that's part of it, but how many conversations take place by lobbyists, law enforcement experts, special interest groups, and others who are policy makers or policy actors in some capacity? It is a common practice in the democratic rules. So for you to try to paint this in some way as though I'm trying to interfere and stop a vote, I gave him my perspective, he made a decision.
Well, so this is being broadcast live, so this is informing them.
I mean, it's not the Dave Show.
No, I mean, this is fine, because you know what, I don't,
No, you worked here.
Well, this is a press conference. I'm pressing.
Sure, and you're taking up the whole time.
yeah, listen,
I'm a reporter asking questions.
Right, there's
I'm going to go to your colleagues now and give them a chance, and we'll get back to
You
it.
talked a little bit about this, about transparency, about transparent investigations at your meeting with the speaker off-site, out of public view. How was that transparent?
Am I standing in front of you right now to discuss it? Did I come in here and not reveal when I first spoke with you the meetings and the conversations that I've had? Because this was brought to our attention just a few weeks ago. How many bills in legislation right now relate to law enforcement issues? Any idea? A lot, yeah. So we talk on a lot of those, and sometimes some become pressing and others don't. But again, you're treating this as though, and I wish I had the influence that you're portraying that I have, that by my mere word and experience, as I should not share it. I mean, that is your opinion, that if I have a concern relative to why this wouldn't work, that I should keep it to myself and let a bill potentially pass without that information, knowing that I believe there are concerns with it. So by expressing my concerns, you believe that I'm undermining the democratic process? Is that what I'm to understand?
You're putting words in my mouth. I'm not saying.
No, that was formed in a question.
The democratic process. I'm just saying there's a transparent process. You could have brought up a lot of this during committee, in which before this.
The only conversation that I was involved in, as I told you, was on the phone when after the fact it came to us, and I expressed my concerns then to the representative who wrote the legislation. And they talked about amendments, which was this, one was already written on it, and the potential for others. So I guess my question is, why is it so offensive to have a law enforcement leader express concerns over legislation that, in my opinion, I believe falls short of what is in the best interest of the community? Why is that a problem? Would it be better if I sat back and said nothing and allowed legislation to pass that does nothing to improve the issue of law enforcement related shootings? Because nowhere in here did you hear me say I'm in opposition to an outside agency investigating law enforcement shootings. Nowhere in here did I say that we should be less transparent or less accountable. To the contrary, I said why we should. But you have issue with the fact that I had conversations not with the speaker himself alone, but also the legislator who wrote this legislation and articulated the same exact facts. And then as elected officials who have the responsibility to make a determination as to what bill should hit the floor or not, what should be voted, if they come out of committee, do they always go through the House? Those are for them to decide. But I have an inherent responsibility to express issues of concern that affect law enforcement operations in the best interest, in my opinion, of the community's needs and well-being.
So if not this bill, what does the...
And I apologize, I don't know who you are.
Josh Kelly, Phoenix New Times. If not this bill, what does the ideal bill look like? Is it allocating more funding to smaller law enforcement agencies that don't have investigator capacity to partner with bigger agencies that have a higher volume of police shootings? Is it specific statute mandating that the partnering agencies release those reports? I guess what would the ideal bill look like?
Very thoughtful question. The ideal bill should be something that is in support of a complex solution that involves all the agencies, that you can fund training, that you can set parameters on it that have, whatever restrictions so that everyone stays within those guidelines. It should be specific in what circumstances, because as I stated on this one, it says when someone dies. What if we're involved in an incident where a person doesn't die at the scene, they die 2 weeks later, and they're not investigated under this legislation by a third party because it's not required? But then after the fact, it appears as though, why didn't you have another agency investigate those circumstances, because it falls short of that? So there are a lot of elements, but I believe a solution can be derived and that legislation can be written to support that. Because not every agency has the funding or the resources to accomplish these things. And it's going to be something that's necessary to ensure that we have consistency with all law enforcement agencies.
So on a somewhat unrelated note, your office recently released the PSB internal investigations into the Shea McGow incident in 2017, where a deputy released a canine in him in a holding cell. The PSB investigations cleared him, his chain of command cleared him. Everyone said that was appropriate by policy. Do you consider his actions, the canine handler's actions, good policing? Do you think that's a model for other law enforcement agencies?
That's a case in litigation, so anything that I speak to now is going to have to speak to again in court, where I'll be subpoenaed to. I'm sure I have to speak on his own behalf representing the office, so I can't answer that right now because there's a pending lawsuit.
Do you stand by the PSB investigations and the internal investigations?
I stand by my investigators' outcomes, yeah. The federal court monitors review those also to make sure that they believe that it meets all the requirements, that it is ethical and that it is objective, it has all the details in it. So let me get back to these and we can talk more about that, but let's finish this issue at hand. Go ahead.
You mentioned this task force that you're willing to lead, or at least in creating it. What's the goal of this task force? Is it to end police shootings, fatal encounters? Is it to prosecute police officers? What would be the goal for that?
Well, I think first and foremost, the task force should be designed so that we can address this issue and the demand thereof. As I stated earlier, our number one responsibility should be preservation of life, but in those circumstances where we don't have the opportunity to, that we are faced with a threat and a life is taken, we need to make sure that that investigation is properly conducted, that information is released to the community in the appropriate time frame so they can trust in what we've accomplished, that we protect the details of the case itself, so when it comes to prosecution, we haven't undermined, whether it be the Attorney General's office or the County Attorney's office, relative to their expectations of what information should be limited or released, and that ultimately there's never an allegation or an accusation that we investigated our own and therefore it is a flawed or subjective investigation that the community can't trust that we were thoughtful and fair.
So, but again, I mean, do we not, you as the sheriff, do we not want to end police shootings or fatal encounters? I mean, should we not reduce that number? Time and time again, there's different studies, both by academics and journalists, that Arizona leads in fatal shootings, or not leads, but it's at least top 4, top 5, depending on the year.
Yeah,
so I mean, what's the point of creating this task force if it's only just going to end up clearing police officers time and time again?
Well, there's other elements to the issue because you're bringing up a complex issue. Should we be doing everything we can to save lives? Absolutely. Every time we take a life, it is a tragedy and it's something that shouldn't occur. Now, what needs to be realized is in all those circumstances, it is not something that is initiated by law enforcement. We are reactionary to circumstances as they evolve, and oftentimes it is the actions of another that contribute or force the hand of a law enforcement official. So how do we address that? That's a societal issue, and we're both responsible for it, community as well as law enforcement. So, some of the things we've done here is created a wellness division, and that seems so, well, what does that mean? the more we do to ensure that our employees aren't dealing with outside stressors or distractions or factors that could contribute to their emotional state, the more stable that they are, hopefully the more effective they can be when they're engaging with members of the community, and that we can find a way to de-escalate or resolve those circumstances. So it's the number one priority to find ways to reduce loss of life in crime itself, as well as in law enforcement engaged defense, absolutely. Why create the task force? Because we still have an obligation or responsibility to answer to our community when we do have to take those actions and make sure that it is a fair process, and if there's a criminal act, that someone is held accountable. What else?
My last question is, how long is it gonna take for you guys to figure this out? Is it a year, 5 years, a decade until we forget? I mean, what's the?
Yeah, I don't know what to say with your tone, Dave, because you try to be so confrontational for some reason. It makes it better journalism, and it doesn't. The truth of the matter is this: I don't have a time frame. As I said before, this has been 200 years. I had told them that my hope is that within 90 days we will have at least a template of what a working group could look like, and then we're going to have to figure out who wants to participate in it and take it to the next step of actually developing it, putting a training in place, and having a way to test this in the field to make sure that it meets all the requirements. So you're asking me for a time frame, which sets me up for failure, because if I told you 3 months and it took 4, you'd say I didn't make the deadline. If I told you 3 years and it took 2, then you'd say it was still too long. So the time frame is when we get this thing built the way that it will be sustainable, so that long after I'm gone, after being sheriff, that the next one in has an effective working program that does what it should do, which is accomplish the goals that we're all concerned about.
And a few minutes ago, you mentioned influence, and you said that maybe we think you have more influence than we do. One guy that does have a lot of influence is Attorney General Mark Brnovich. Did he and his office support this bill? Have you had any discussions with them?
No. And I've reached out a few times before. I couldn't tell you why, but I've offered to meet with him about this exact issue on a few times, saying let's sit down and have coffee, but he's a busy man also. And the fact that he supports it, there's some that support it, some that don't. I'm giving you my individual opinion and the facts for why I feel this way. That doesn't make me right, it doesn't make me wrong. But my job is to share them so that they're given for consideration. No different than when I talk to Representative Boulding or I talk to Representative Bowers. Information for consideration. I can tell you this: the Attorney General is not the person responsible to develop the operational aspects of investigating these cases. He's the recipient of the cases when they're concluded. No different than county attorney. So their perspective is going to be different than my own. But as I told you earlier, the majority of law enforcement leaders feel the same way that I do. They participate in the same meetings or conversations that I have. So there's always two sides of the coin.
The message right now is you want to put together this task force. You could have a working template within 90 days about how that could come together. Meanwhile, the same public that you said that you've got to regain their trust is going to have to be happy with the status quo.
No, I don't think you're happy with the status quo. I think that we have to be in it. I'm sorry.
They're stuck with it for now. Probably till at least next year.
Does somebody in here have a magic wand that you think that this legislation suddenly changes everything overnight, that the problem is resolved? Is that the expectation, that you think that by implementing this, hold on a second, no, let me, so I keep referring as if it's behind me, implementing this, that suddenly the next day the sun shines brighter and the grass looks greener? No, this has been a problem for far too long. Therefore, we have to develop a comprehensive solution. Now, what can I commit to? That if you want to revisit this every 30 days and I can tell you what progress we've made and you can judge me on if we've made progress or not, that's the fairest thing I can offer. But if you think that I can offer you something right now that suddenly gives everybody solace, like, oh, it'll all be better tomorrow, no, we have to build it. And if it was that easy to build, like you said, why is it taking this long? I don't know. How many came before me that didn't? And I have not yet. That's why I said normally I like to talk to you when I've finished something, not when I've started it. But in these circumstances, in this political climate, and those who want to make sure that, you're the breaking news, you want to see if you can break some folks who are trying to do better. I'm not going to be broken because I'm going to do the best I can every day. And I'm going to close with this. And I normally don't get personal, but I'm going to, because I find offense to the tone that sometimes is taken, because I've always been thoughtful, and I've been present, and I've been available. But you think you know me as a law enforcement leader. You stand here and you judge my actions when I get something right or when I get something wrong, and that's your prerogative. Absolutely. As an elected official, my job is to answer to you. But more importantly, I answer to my family. And I go home to a wife who looks on her phone and sees an incident of someone shot and killed by law enforcement, sometimes a minority. Either she's upset or she's crying, because my stepson is biracial. So I will be damned if I'll sit here and let you try to judge me as if I'm putting police over people or over my family when this is personal for me. Getting this done right. And I'm not going to stand in front of legislation that has 130 words of poorly written with holes and no teeth in it that's going to pretend to make positive change when it isn't. I'm going to work to get to that place because I don't care what your opinion is of me. I'll listen to your constructive thoughts. But I do care when I walk in the house that my family feels safer, that if my oldest son, who's my stepson, or my son engage with law enforcement, that they will go home alive. And that God forbid something happens, that those responsible be held accountable, whether it is a criminal or a cop who acted criminally. So you want something more than that, you're not going to get it from me. You're going to get hard work to get to a solution. But I am not going to stand here and let you insinuate or act as though I'm trying to stop democracy because I just want to stunt the opportunity to make it better, or to give this community law enforcement leadership that they can count on and trust. So that's how I'll close this meeting. And normally I don't even like to go there because I shouldn't have to. It doesn't matter either way. But for me, there are times you push my button, it becomes personal. Today's one of those days, so well done.